The Arizona sun hung low and red across the late afternoon sky, turning the dusty horizon into a wavering line of heat and light. The rest stop off Interstate 17 was one of those places people barely remembered after they left. Two aging bathroom buildings, a vending machine shelter, a scattered handful of picnic tables, and the steady groan of semi-trucks rolling in and out. Families stretched their legs, dogs sniffed along the concrete curbs, teenagers kicked gravel just to kill time, and parents checked their phones to see how much longer the drive would be. It was ordinary in every way until the little girl in the pink hoodie appeared. Kaylee stood near the vending machines, holding a worn gray rabbit whose fabric had been loved into a soft fuzz. Her sneakers were scuffed, her hair tangled from hours in a car, and her shoulders hunched in a way most kids didn't carry themselves unless something heavy sat underneath their small world. She didn't run around. She didn't explore. She didn't wander. She stayed very still, too still for a 7-year-old at a rest stop. Beside her stood a tall man with a rigid posture and an unwelcoming aura. He wore dark sunglasses even though the sun had begun to drop, a black jacket zipped high despite the heat, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively keep their distance. He checked his watch too often, scanned the parking lot too frequently, and kept one hand resting tightly on Kaylee's shoulder as if she were a possession, not a child. No one looked twice. Families had places to be, truckers were exhausted, tourists were too busy juggling snacks and bathroom breaks. No one saw the stiffness in the little girl's neck. No one saw the slight trembling in her hands. No one saw the way she kept glancing at the dogs. Because a cluster of police vehicles had just pulled in, not for an emergency but for something routine and forgettable. A K-9 training stop. 14 police dogs, from bloodhounds to shepherds to a surprisingly focused Labrador, jumped out, stretching, panting, wagging, ready to practice search drills across the open desert brush. Handlers laughed, chatting casually as they clipped leashes and checked gear. A couple of families stood at a distance to watch. The dogs were impressive and kids loved them. The air filled with happy barks, jingling collars, and the quick patter of paws on concrete. Everyone saw the dogs. No one saw the girl. No one except the dogs. When the handlers gathered near the vending area for a quick debrief, the dogs suddenly stopped their playful jostling. One by one, as if controlled by some invisible signal, they went silent. It happened so subtly that no human registered the shift at first. A dozen officers continued chatting while a tourist family opened a bag of chips, completely unaware that 14 trained police dogs had become statues, eyes locked on the same point. Kaylee. She noticed the shift instantly. Her eyes met Titan's first, the big sable German shepherd belonging to Officer Ramirez. Titan wasn't barking. He wasn't lunging. He wasn't growling. He was staring, unblinking, as if he had just been whispered a secret that no one else could hear. Kaylee swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the rabbit. Her shoulders raised a fraction in fear. Then very subtly, she moved her hand. She didn't wave. She didn't motion dramatically. She didn't call out. Instead, she raised one small hand to chest height, palm facing inward, and folded her thumb across her palm. Then she curled her fingers down. To anyone else, it would have looked like a meaningless twitch of her hand. A kid fidgeting, a random gesture, nothing more. But she held it for 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. A quiet, desperate plea, one she hoped anyone might understand. No human did. But the dogs, every single one lifted their heads higher, as if a command had been given. One dog let out a low, involuntary whine. Another shifted restlessly. Titan's ears snapped forward so sharply that Ramirez finally glanced down, confused. Still, he didn't see the girl's hand. He didn't see the bruise hidden under her sleeve. He didn't see the terror quietly clawing through her small body. But he saw Titan's stance, rigid, alert, laser-focused. And that meant something was wrong. Ramirez followed Titan's gaze, and that was the first time he noticed the little girl. She wasn't with the families nearby. She didn't look excited to see the dogs. She didn't move her feet or shift her weight like a bored child. She stood frozen beside the tall man, frozen in fear. The man seemed oblivious to her gesture, too busy scanning the parking lot. He gripped her shoulder, pressing into her painfully. She winced, but didn't make a sound. Ramirez frowned. A prickle went up his neck. Dogs didn't lock onto kids like that without a reason. Before he even consciously decided to approach, Titan tugged forward, muscles tight. K9 units don't act like this without a trigger, Ramirez muttered under his breath. Nearby handlers began noticing their own dogs, the starring, the sudden silence, the change in posture. One officer joked, "What's gotten into them?" None of them realized something was unfolding right under their noses. Kaylee glanced up at the man beside her. He hadn't noticed the dog's reaction. Good. She kept her face still, pretending nothing had happened, but inside her heart hammered so loudly she was sure the dogs could hear it. She wasn't supposed to signal anyone. She wasn't supposed to look at anyone. She wasn't supposed to draw attention. But she had seen a video months earlier, a video explaining a secret hand signal, a silent call for help, a way for someone to know you were in danger. She had practiced it once in the bathroom mirror, wondering if she'd ever need it. Now she did. Now she really, really did. She risked another glance at Titan. The dog's tail rose stiff. His breathing changed. His hind legs shifted, preparing. He wasn't just alert. He was responding. Kaylee didn't understand police protocols. She didn't understand why the dogs reacted when the humans didn't. All she knew was that the dogs had seen her. And the man beside her. He was starting to notice that the officers were looking in his direction. His grip tightened on her shoulder. "Let's go," he muttered sharply. "Now." Kaylee stiffened. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare speak. She didn't dare look back at the dogs again. Because her stomach already knew something was about to go very, very wrong. And when Titan suddenly growled low in his throat, deep, angry, unmistakably protective, the entire rest stop turned to look. Every officer froze. Every dog leaned forward. Every sound seemed to die. As for Kaylee, her eyes widened, because the man's hand shifted from her shoulder to somewhere inside his jacket. Officer Ramirez had seen Titan alert on drugs, on weapons, on missing persons, but never like this. The dog's entire body leaned toward the little girl as if pulled by an invisible cord. His hackles stood straight up along his back, not in aggression but in recognition, like he had been waiting for that small gesture she had made. Something deep and primal inside him responded. Ramirez tightened his grip on the leash, feeling the dog's muscles coil. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Titan didn't blink. His gaze remained fixed on Kaylee. To someone untrained, Titan might have simply looked curious, but Ramirez had been a K9 handler for 9 years. He could read a dog's emotions like a second language. Titan was sensing fear, intense, suffocating fear, the kind that clung to a person like smoke. Around them, other handlers began noticing similar behavior. Leashes went taut, paws shifted, heads lowered. 14 dogs, all trained for different specialties, acted as one. 14 dogs reacting in perfect sync was no coincidence. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Yet none of the humans saw the true reason, not yet. Kaylee's fingers were trembling so slightly most people would mistake it for cold, but it wasn't the desert wind making her shake. It was the man beside her, Uncle Rick, though she had never called him that willingly. He towered over her with a presence that swallowed air and light alike. Every time she even turned her head, he snapped at her. Every time she slowed her step, he yanked her forward. Every time she made eye contact with someone else, his grip tightened just enough to send a silent threat. But the dogs were different. They saw her. Even when she didn't move, even when she stayed silent, they understood. She had made the gesture again, small, tight, hidden from the man's view. Thumb tucked, fingers down. A signal she'd seen once on the internet, meant for desperate situations, meant for people in danger with no safe way to speak. She had hoped maybe, just maybe, someone would know it. She never imagined dogs would. As Titan's growl grew louder, the man finally noticed. His head snapped toward Ramirez, toward the barking dogs, and then toward Kaylee, as if trying to understand why so many trained K-9 units were staring at a 7-year-old girl like she had just shouted fire. "What the hell is their problem?" he barked at Ramirez, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. Ramirez lifted his palms calmly. "Sir, your girl seems scared. Everything okay?" Kaylee's heart hammered. "Please say something," she begged silently. "Please don't make him angry." The man forced a tight smile, one that didn't touch his eyes. "She's tired, long drive, that's all." Kaylee looked down at her shoes, fighting the instinct to shake her head. She couldn't, not yet. The wrong move could cost her. She learned that the hard way. But the dogs heard the lie. Titan stepped forward again, growl deepening. A Belgian Malinois to their left pulled so hard her handler stumbled. A bloodhound sat, frozen, chest vibrating with a low warning hum. The entire rest stop seemed to tilt toward the unfolding tension. A trucker paused mid-step with a cup of coffee. A teenage girl lowered her phone to get a better look. A mother scooped up her toddler, sensing danger she couldn't explain. Then Titan barked. It wasn't random. It wasn't playful. It wasn't confused. It was loud, sharp, forceful. A bark that meant alert. Kaylee's stomach dropped. She flinched so hard her rabbit nearly fell again. And that was the moment Ramirez saw it, the bruise. Just for a second, the sleeve of her hoodie slid back as she grabbed her stuffed rabbit. The purple mark around her wrist wasn't the result of a playground fall. It was shaped like fingers, long, strong fingers. The man's fingers. Ramirez's blood ran cold. "Sir," he said, carefully steadying his voice, "I need to ask." He didn't finish. The man grabbed Kaylee's wrist, hard, too hard. She gasped in pain. That was all it took for the dogs. Every one of them barked, furious, protective, certain. Ramirez stepped forward, hand brushing his holster. "Let her go." The man's jaw tightened. "Back off, she's my niece." But the way he said niece didn't sound like family, more like property. Kaylee dared a tiny glance up at Ramirez. Her eyes brimmed with silent begging. She didn't move, she didn't speak, she didn't dare, but her eyes told the whole story. She wasn't tired. She wasn't shy. She wasn't nervous. She was afraid to breathe. The man noticed her glance, and his entire body stiffened. He jerked her closer to his side, shielding her from the officers with a possessive agitation that set every instinct in Ramirez ablaze. "Sir, I need you to release her arm," Ramirez said. "No." The word snapped like a whip. Firm, final, dangerous. Ramirez took a slow step. "You're hurting her." The man's free hand slipped into his jacket. The dogs erupted. Handlers struggled to hold them back. Leashes burned against gloves. A few officers reached instinctively for their belts. But Kaylee. She stood completely still. No screaming. No running. No crying. Just a wide-eyed stillness, like a creature that learned long ago she wasn't allowed to react. Her voice came out tiny, almost a whisper, "Please." The man tightened his grip, quiet. Ramirez's eyes sharpened. "What's in your jacket?" The man said nothing. Kaylee's breath hitched. Her rabbit slipped. It fell to the concrete with a soft, almost heartbreaking thud, the way something loved falls from hands too small to hold both fear and plush comfort at once. The man's hand finished emerging from his jacket. Ramirez braced. So did every handler. So did every dog. So did every bystander. Kaylee's eyes flickered, not toward the man, not toward the officers, but toward the dogs. She didn't speak, but she made the signal again, quicker this time, almost frantic. Thumb tucked. Fingers down. Help me. Titan lurched so hard Ramirez nearly lost his grip. The man's hand came fully out of his jacket. A glint of metal caught the sinking sun. Ramirez sucked in a breath. Knife. Kaylee froze. The man's grip turned painful. The dogs crouched ready. And the rest stop fell into a silence so sharp it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Everything was about to explode. Because the man now had a weapon, and the little girl was inches from the blade. The knife's glint caught the last streak of Arizona daylight, turning the blade into a flash of burning white. Every officer stiffened. Every bystander froze. Every police dog strained closer, as if the world had shrunk to one man, one little girl, and one terrible choice. Kaylee felt the man's grip tighten around her wrist, the same spot already darkened by bruises. She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She simply trembled, small, silent, terrified. Ramirez raised a steady hand toward the handlers behind him. "Stay calm," he murmured, though his pulse thudded like a drum inside his chest. The man jerked Kaylee backward, using her as a shield. "Stay back," he snarled. "I said stay back." Kaylee stumbled, her shoes scraping harshly on the concrete as she caught herself. Her stuffed rabbit lay on the ground where it had fallen, a soft, gray reminder of the childhood she was barely allowed to have. Its button eye reflected the sunlight like a tiny tear. Slowly, deliberately, Ramirez lowered himself into a half-crouch, not threatening, not aggressive, just grounded, steady, human. "Sir," he said, voice level, "you don't want to do this." "Oh, don't I?" the man snapped, squeezing Kaylee hard enough to make her wince. "You think you know anything about this situation?" Titan barked, a booming, chest-deep warning that echoed across the rest stop. Other dogs answered, tension rippling down the line of 14 trained K9s. They were practically vibrating with protective instinct. A German shepherd at the far end pawed the pavement repeatedly, claws scraping concrete in a frantic rhythm. The Malinois growled, teeth bared. Even the Labrador, sweet, gentle, usually calm, had stiffened into a posture no one had ever seen from him during training. Ramirez didn't break eye contact with the man. "You're scaring her." "She should be scared," the man snapped, spit flying. "She never listens." His grip twisted, and Kaylee sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. It was that sound, small, broken, cut off too quickly, that made something inside Ramirez ignite. "That's enough," Ramirez said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. His hand hovered near his holster. "Release her." The man pulled the knife closer to her side, not deep enough to break the skin, but enough to make her whole body go rigid. A nearby mother gasped. A teenager started to record. A trucker whispered, "Holy hell." Ramirez's eyes flicked to the rabbit on the ground. Kids drop toys all the time, but the way the rabbit lay, face down, arms outstretched, felt symbolic, like hope had fallen out of Kaylee's hands. "I don't want trouble," the man said, voice trembling just enough to betray nerves. "I just need to leave, that's all." "Kidnapping a child and crossing state lines," Ramirez countered. "You're already in trouble." The man's sunglasses reflected the chaos. The officers, the dogs, the families frozen in place. "Step back," he ordered, pulling Kaylee even closer. Her tiny voice broke through, barely above air. "I want to go home." His grip tightened. Ramirez felt something inside him break. Titan sensed it too, because the dog rose on his hind legs, snarling, trying to pull free. The man flinched at the sudden movement, shifting his weight. That tiny misstep loosened his grip for a fraction of a second. Kaylee's sleeve slid back just enough for the sun to reveal the full bruise, fingerprint-shaped, angry purple, undeniable. Ramirez didn't hesitate. "Sir," he said sharply, "the moment you drew a weapon near a child, this became a felony. Put the knife down." "No," the man shook visibly now. "Everyone needs to back off." Kaylee's breath came out in short, terrified bursts. Ramirez could see the panic rising in her chest, the way her small ribcage fluttered like a trapped bird's wings. But then something unexpected happened. Her eyes met his. Just for a second. Just enough. In that single look, Ramirez saw everything she hadn't spoken. "Help me, please. I don't know what else to do. I am so scared." And something in his own expression told her that he understood. That moment, silent, fragile, became a tether between them. "Kaylee," Ramirez said softly, "you're safe now, I promise." The man snapped his attention to Ramirez. "Don't say her name." Titan barked again, louder, angrier. The sound pushed the man's nerves over the edge. Sweat trickled down his temples. His eyes darted from dog to officer, from officer to crowd, from crowd to car. Panic clawed up his throat. He was unraveling. "Uncle Rick," Kaylee whispered, voice trembling. "Please, please don't." "Shut up," he hissed, shaking her so hard her teeth clicked. Every dog lunged simultaneously. Handlers nearly lost grip. Ramirez took a slow step forward. "Sir," he said, "listen carefully. You're outnumbered 14-1. These dogs will reach you before you even move that knife an inch." The man's breathing grew ragged. He pressed the blade closer. Kaylee whimpered, a sound so small yet so devastating that even the bystanders felt their hearts twist. Ramirez took one more step. Titan's growl rumbled like thunder. "Put the knife down," Ramirez repeated. For a moment the man's expression flickered. Fear, rage, desperation, all tangled in a single twisted snarl. He shifted his feet, preparing to move. And that shift changed everything. It exposed, just for a heartbeat, exactly how tightly he held Kaylee, how he positioned her body to block his, how he prepared to run, how the knife angled too close to her ribs. And it gave Ramirez a single, horrifying realization. The man wasn't preparing to escape. He was preparing to do something irreversible if officers got too close. Ramirez's fingers brushed the safety on his holster. He didn't want to fire, not with Kaylee in the way, not with a blade pressed to her side, but every second the man grew more frantic increased the danger. The nearest officer whispered, "Say the word, Ramirez." But Ramirez didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off Kaylee. Her lower lip trembled, her shoulders shook, tears swam in her eyes, not falling, not yet, held back by sheer survival instincts. Her rabbit lay on the ground, forgotten. The man took one step backward toward the vending machines, his body tense as a coiled trap. "No one follows," he warned. But Titan did. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, predator-silent. The man noticed. His eyes widened. His grip shifted. Just enough that Kaylee's shoe slipped on the concrete. She wobbled. Her rabbit slid across the pavement. Ramirez inhaled sharply. And in that split second, everything teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The man pivoted, dragging Kaylee toward the back of the vending machines, knife raised, adrenaline spiking, trying to disappear with her before anyone could stop him. The dogs launched. Ramirez shouted. Kaylee screamed. And the rest stop erupted into chaos. The moment the man yanked Kaylee behind the vending machines, the entire rest stop seemed to fall into a vacuum of sound. Conversations died mid-sentence. A mother's scream cut off in her throat. Even the wind felt like it stopped moving, held in place by the raw terror of what was unfolding just beyond those humming machines filled with soda and stale chips. Only the dogs didn't freeze. They lunged. Handlers struggled as 14 police dogs strained against their leashes, so hard it looked like their paws might tear straight through the concrete. Their barks boomed like rapid-fire thunder, echoing through the parking lot, bouncing off metal car doors and rocky desert terrain. "Ramirez, he's going behind the structure," Officer Blake shouted as he rushed forward. "I see him," Ramirez barked back, sprinting across the pavement, Titan dragging him like a living rocket. Every instinct inside him screamed danger, raw, immediate danger. Kaylee's terrified cry still rang in his ears, thin and high, the kind of sound that sliced directly through training and protocol and lodged into the human part of his heart that hated seeing children afraid. He tore around the first vending machine, eyes scanning the narrow space behind it. Nothing. But he could hear them. Kaylee's breathless whimper. The man's hurried footsteps scraping against gravel. The faint metallic click of the knife shifting in his grip. Ramirez motioned for 2 officers to circle around the opposite side. "Don't let him reach the trees," he ordered, voice sharp. Because beyond the vending shelter was a stretch of dry brush, a thin trail leading into a dense patch of twisted mesquite trees and desert scrub. If the man made it there with Kaylee, the visibility would drop instantly. The dogs could track them, yes, but the risk to Kaylee would skyrocket. And the man knew it. He was headed straight for that cover. Behind him, 18 civilians huddled together against their vehicles, staring wide-eyed. A little boy cried and clung to his mother's jeans. A teenage girl whispered, "Is this really happening?" A trucker muttered a curse under his breath, gripping the handle of his cab in fear. Then suddenly, a sound. A sharp, panicked cry. "Let go of me. Kaylee." Ramirez stopped breathing for half a second. He turned the corner just in time to see the man dragging her down the narrow concrete walkway behind the vending machines, one hand clamped around her wrist, the other gripping the knife. Her little legs struggled to keep up. Her shoe caught on a crack, and she fell hard to her knees. The man didn't slow. He yanked her back to her feet, so violently her hoodie pulled sideways across her neck. "Move," he hissed at her. Kaylee whimpered, "Please, please don't." "Quiet," he snapped, raising the knife slightly. That was the moment Titan exploded around the corner. Every muscle in his body fired at once, pulling Ramirez forward so powerfully that Ramirez's shoulder wrenched in its socket. But Titan didn't care. He barked so loud that dust literally shook loose from the edge of the metal shelter. Kaylee turned toward the sound, eyes filled with hope so intense it physically hurt Ramirez to see it. But the man reacted too quickly. He jerked her into his arms, pressed her back against his chest, and angled the knife dangerously close to her ribs. "Stay back," he shouted, voice cracking. "I'll do it, I swear, don't test me." The officers behind Ramirez hesitated, frozen between training and terror of escalating the situation. Ramirez raised both palms forward. No sudden movements, no rushing, everything carefully controlled. "Okay," he said calmly, though sweat trickled down his back. "No one is rushing you. No one is firing. No one is attacking. We just want to talk." "You're lying," the man spat. Behind him, Kaylee's small body trembled violently. He didn't loosen his grip. If anything, he squeezed harder. Ramirez measured the distance, 29 feet, too far to disarm, too close to let him disappear into the desert. Every option carried risk. Titan growled again. The sound made the man shift his grip on the knife, and that was when Ramirez saw it, the man's hand shaking. He wasn't just dangerous. He was unstable. "Sir," Ramirez said carefully, "you're making this worse for yourself. Let her go." "She's mine," the man yelled, spit flying. Ramirez's voice hardened. No, she is. The man flinched, the lie finally cracking under pressure. You don't understand, he snapped, voice suddenly strained. Her mom, she shouldn't have, she was going to leave. She was going to take her away from me. His words trembled erratically, tumbling over each other. Kaylee stiffened in his grip, horror growing in her expression. That's not your decision to make, Ramirez said. Hurting a child doesn't fix anything. I'm not hurting her, he shouted, jerking her again. She gasped. Titan barked angrily at the sound. The man panicked. Back off, he screamed. All of you, back off or I'll take her into the woods and you'll never find us. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Ramirez's breath caught. He saw the shift, the man preparing to run again. Officers tightened their grips on their weapons. But then something changed. A breeze pushed through the narrow corridor behind the vending machines, sending a gust of warm desert air swirling across a layer of sand. The sunlight dipped 1 inch lower, casting the man's shadow onto the concrete behind him. And behind that shadow, 14 dog shadows stretched long and dark. 14 animals crouched. 14 sets of eyes locked on the same target. 14 bodies ready to launch. The man didn't see the shadows. Kaylee did. Her trembling lips parted in the tiniest, most fragile whisper. Please, please help me. Her voice broke. Her knees almost buckled. Ramirez's stomach twisted. The man heard the whisper and whipped his head around angrily. Stop talking, stop it. You're scaring her, Ramirez repeated. I said stop. The man raised the knife. Kaylee screamed. Titan lunged. Handlers shouted. Ramirez's heart dropped. But the man didn't stab. Not yet. He made his most desperate, reckless decision yet. He yanked Kaylee with him and sprinted toward the open desert trail behind the vending machines, dragging her straight toward the thick trees where visibility vanished and the danger multiplied tenfold. Ramirez shouted, He's going for the woods, Gio, Gio. Titan tore free. Officers sprinted. The dogs erupted into pursuit. And as Kaylee's terrified cry echoed into the desert twilight, every single person at that rest stop realized the same chilling truth. Once he disappeared into those trees, nobody knew if Kaylee would ever come back. The desert swallowed their footsteps instantly. Dry sand kicked up behind the man as he dragged Kaylee off the concrete and into the tangled brush. Twisted mesquite branches whipped against her arms. Pebbles slid beneath her sneakers. Every step felt like falling. She stumbled, but the man's grip never loosened. If anything, he squeezed harder, pulling her along like a rag doll. Behind them, the rest stop dissolved into noise and motion. 14 police dogs broke formation in a synchronized explosion of muscle and instinct. Officers sprinted after them, but the dogs were faster, much faster, cutting through the desert trail with devastating efficiency. Titan track, Ramirez yelled. Titan didn't need the command. He was already locked onto Kaylee's scent, body low, paws kicking dirt in rapid, furious bursts. His ears flattened against his skull, teeth bared, every fiber of his being focused on the child's terrified screams fading deeper into the wild. The sun had dipped behind the canyon ridge, turning the desert gold, then orange, then a warning red glow that stretched across the sand like a smear of danger. Wind rushed past, carrying the sound of panting dogs, cracking branches, and the man's frantic muttering as he plunged into the thick undergrowth. Just stop crying, he snapped at Kaylee. You're making this worse. I want my mom, Kaylee sobbed. Quiet. Her cry cracked the evening air so sharply that Titan accelerated, almost ripping his handler off his feet. Ramirez stumbled but held on. Stay with him, he called to the officers behind him. But Titan wasn't staying with anyone. He was pulling ahead, so far ahead that Ramirez had to release the extra slack on the lead. The rope burned in his hands as he tried to keep pace. Up ahead, the man shoved aside a cluster of desert shrubs and hauled Kaylee through a gap between two boulders. The terrain suddenly dipped into a shallow ravine. Dry tumbleweed and broken branches littered the ground like traps waiting to catch small feet. Kaylee tripped again. Her knees hit rock hard. She cried out. The sound ignited every canine instinct behind her. The dogs split. Without needing commands, 4 took the high path along the ridge, flanking from above. 6 barreled down the center trail behind Titan. The remaining 4 swung wide, circling to cut off potential escape points. Officers shouted for formation. The dogs didn't listen. They were beyond commands now, operating on training, yes, but also pure instinct, pure protection, pure focus on the tiny voice that kept breaking through the trees. "Please," Kaylee sobbed. "I want my mommy." The man spun on her. "Stop it." He raised the knife. Kaylee froze, eyes wide, body going still. The man hesitated, just 1 second, but it was enough. A branch snapped behind him. He jerked his head to look. A pair of glowing canine eyes stared back from the shadows between 2 boulders. A black German shepherd, one of the flankers, crouched low, silent, lips curled in a snarl. The man panicked. He grabbed Kaylee again and veered sharply to the left, vaulting over a fallen log as he dragged her into another stretch of brush. Branches sliced across his arms. He didn't care. He heard the dogs closing in. He heard officers yelling out positions. He heard Titan's bark, deep, thunderous, too close. "No, no, no, no," he gasped, his voice breaking. He rounded a cluster of dead mesquite thorns and suddenly skidded to a stop. A cliff edge. A steep drop-off stretched in front of him, maybe 12 feet down, lined with jagged rocks and coarse sand. He looked left. Thick brush would slow him too much. He looked right. 2 dogs emerging at the ridge above him. He made a decision. A terrible one. He jumped. He dragged Kaylee with him. They tumbled. Kaylee screamed as her elbow scraped against rock. The man lost grip of the knife. It clattered away, sliding down the hill. Sand flew. Body rolled. A cloud of dust exploded upward. When they hit the bottom, the man groaned, clutching his shoulder. But he forced himself up, grabbed Kaylee again, and limped painfully forward into the shadowed ravine. He didn't see Titan land behind him just seconds later, 10 feet from where the knife still lay half buried in sand. Titan hit the slope in a controlled slide, hind legs braced, claws scraping rock. Ramirez scrambled down behind him, boots kicking loose pebbles. "Titan on me," Ramirez commanded breathlessly. But Titan wasn't waiting. He bolted. A blur of fur and fury. Ramirez cursed under his breath and powered through the ravine, shouting into his radio. "We're in Sector 4. Suspect heading northeast along the wash, injured but still mobile. Child is with him." Officers echoed confirmation across channels. Ahead, the ravine narrowed into a crooked canyon corridor. Desperate footprints embedded in soft sand led deeper inside. Kaylee's tiny prints staggered in frantic zigzags. Ramirez's chest constricted. She was exhausted, terrified, running out of strength. "Keep going," he urged Titan. "Find her, find her." The canyon walls grew taller, darker. The desert sun no longer reached this part. The air cooled, trapping sound. They could hear everything. Every breath. Every footstep. Every sob. Kaylee's cries echoed faintly ahead, fearful, weakening. Then another sound. The man shouting. "Stop fighting me." Ramirez's pulse spiked. He pushed harder. Titan turned a corner sharply. And froze. Ramirez nearly slammed into him. "What is it? What do you?" Then he saw. The canyon corridor had narrowed so tightly it formed a natural choke point, barely wide enough for one adult to pass through at a time. And at the other end, illuminated by a single sliver of fading sunlight, the man knelt in the sand, panting heavily, gripping Kaylee with both hands. He wasn't dragging her anymore. He was recoiling, backing away, because he was surrounded. Dogs above, dogs behind, dogs closing in from both sides, emerging through the cracks in the canyon wall like phantoms shaped from dust. 14 sets of eyes glowed in the dim orange light. 14 dogs stood perfectly still, shoulders rigid, ears forward. No growling, no barking, just silence. Predatory, controlled silence. The man felt it, felt the shift, felt the hopelessness closing around him like a tightening loop. "I stay away," he shouted, voice cracking. I'll hurt her, I'll." But his words trembled. His arm trembled. His entire body trembled. He wasn't in control anymore. Kaylee saw her chance. A tiny one. Barely a sliver of possibility. She looked up at the nearest dog, Titan, only 10 feet away, poised like a coiled spring. Her lips quivered. Her voice was barely a breath. "Help me." Titan moved. One step. The man flinched violently, back or I'll. His hand splintered open from tension. And that was when Ramirez finally saw it. Not rage. Not cold calculation. Not even determination. But fear. Desperate, fractured, disoriented fear. The man wasn't thinking clearly. He was unraveling. One wrong move, one wrong tone, one wrong twitch could set him off. Ramirez raised his hand slowly. Okay, listen to me, don't do anything rash. Look around you, you're cornered, you know that, but you have a choice. We can end this without anyone getting hurt. Just let her go." "No." Kaylee whimpered at the shout. Titan crouched lower. Another officer's voice crackled faintly on the radio behind Ramirez. "CISP closing on Canyon, drones visual." Ramirez ignored it. All his focus was forward. On the trembling knife hand. On Kaylee's tear-streaked face. On the 14 dogs, calculating the next microsecond of movement. "Let her go," Ramirez said softly. The man stared at him. A long, fractured moment passed. Then, a rustle behind the man. He whipped around in panic. A small stone slipped from the canyon wall and hit the sand beside him. He jerked backward and accidentally loosened his grip on Kaylee's arm. Just for a split second. Just long enough. For Titan's muscles to coil into a full launch position. For Kaylee to feel freedom brush against her wrist. For Ramirez to realize what was about to happen. Everything slowed. Everything balanced on a knife edge. And then, the man made his most dangerous move yet. He grabbed Kaylee again. But this time, he yanked her toward the canyon wall. And reached for something buried in the shadow behind a cluster of rocks. Something the officers hadn't seen him stash during the earlier chaos. Something that glinted in the dying light. A second weapon. And as his hand closed around it, Titan lunged. Kaylee screamed. Ramirez shouted. And the entire canyon exploded into motion. The canyon walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepening as the man's panic reached its peak. Every heartbeat thumped in Ramirez's chest, every breath burned, every fiber of his being screamed that a single misstep could cost Kaylee her life. Titan's paws kicked up sand as the German Shepherd launched himself forward, coiled like a spring, eyes locked on Kaylee's abductor. The man froze mid-grab, panic flashing across his features as he realized Titan had closed the distance in the blink of an eye. The knife he had gripped was useless now, too small a weapon against a predator trained to protect, to intercept, to anticipate the tiniest twitch of danger. Kaylee's tiny voice cracked, "Help me." It wasn't just a cry, it was a lifeline. Titan growled, low and feral, each vibration a warning. 14 dogs had converged into a silent wall of calculated aggression. No barking now, just intent, precision, pure focus on protecting the child. The man's blood ran cold. He had underestimated the animals. "Let her go," Ramirez said, deliberately slow and steady, projecting calm authority into the chaos. "You don't have to do this. You can end it now." The man shook his head, teeth clenched. "I can't," his voice quavered, full of fear and desperation. "They'll shield my life." He stumbled back against the canyon wall, dragging Kaylee with him, her small knees scraping against stone. She whimpered, eyes darting between Titan and the other dogs converging from every angle. She had learned the signal months ago, practiced it when no one was watching. Now it mattered more than anything in her 7-year-old life. She lifted her hand slightly, hidden from the man's view, thumb folded, fingers tucked. The signal. 14 dogs paused, heads snapping in recognition. They understood. Her coded plea had worked. Ramirez felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just instinct. Kaylee had communicated her need and the animals had responded. They had noticed what no human had yet, her subtle call for help. The man realized what was happening. He whirled, dragging her closer, desperately trying to keep control. "No, don't let them, stay back." But the dogs didn't hesitate. They flanked him, circling with predator-like patience, eyes locked, muscles coiled. Titan launched first, intercepting the man's path as Ramirez and the other officers closed in from both sides. The man stumbled, Kaylee pressed against him, the second knife slipping slightly in his shaking hands. Ramirez shouted commands, but his voice was secondary now. The dogs were leading the action. Then Kaylee did something extraordinary. She whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't hurt him if you can help it." The moment hit Ramirez with crushing clarity. This tiny girl, trembling, scared, had the courage to care even while in danger. Her bravery seemed impossible, yet it grounded him. He saw her squeeze the rabbit she still held tightly, as if it were a shield and a talisman all at once. The man lunged suddenly, panic giving him reckless strength. Ramirez instinctively stepped in, grabbing his arm, but it was Titan and the other K9s who controlled the situation. The dogs moved like a single organism, blocking any dangerous swings, forcing him backward step by step, until he was trapped against the canyon wall, nowhere to go. Kaylee's wrist slipped for a moment, scraping against his hand. Her signal flickered, quick, subtle, desperate. The dog stiffened immediately, reacting to her silent plea, and in that instant the man realized the extent of his failure. He was surrounded, outnumbered, overpowered by animals trained to read fear, instinct, and danger, and by a child who knew the secret signal no adult had noticed. "Please just let her go," Ramirez said calmly. "You don't have to do this." The man's chest heaved. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His grip on Kaylee faltered. She gasped as his hold loosened slightly. Titan lunged, barking fiercely, forcing him to release her completely. The little girl stumbled forward, catching herself with her free hand on a rock, clutching her rabbit. Ramirez rushed forward, wrapping his arms around Kaylee and pulling her safely behind him. The man's second knife clattered to the sand. The other dogs circled, alert but controlled, making sure he couldn't reach for her again. "You're safe now, Kaylee," Ramirez said, voice thick with relief. "It's over." The man slumped against the canyon wall, chest heaving, cornered completely. 14 dogs watched him like predators, Titan growling softly but steadily, ensuring he didn't move. Kaylee's voice trembled, small but strong. Did the dogs really know? Titan tilted his head, nudging her hand gently. His eyes were warm, protective, intelligent. Kaylee wrapped her little fingers around his paw instinctively. She felt the warmth and strength of the animals that had saved her life. The man tried to speak, but his words were incoherent, broken by exhaustion and fear. Officers moved in quickly, cuffing him, reading his rights as Ramirez held Kaylee close. She clung to the rabbit, her small body still shaking but safe at last. One officer whispered, "I've never seen anything like that. 14 dogs, they just knew." Ramirez nodded, voice quiet, almost in awe. She made them notice. She signaled, and they understood. A 7-year-old girl saved herself with a hand gesture and a stuffed rabbit. Kaylee looked up at him, eyes wide and shimmering with tears. I practiced it just in case," she admitted softly. Ramirez felt a lump in his throat. Her courage, intelligence, and presence of mind had outsmarted a dangerous adult. She had survived the impossible. A gentle wind rustled the canyon walls. The sun had fully set, leaving a soft twilight glow over the desert floor. For the first time since the ordeal began, there was silence, except for the quiet panting of Titan and the other dogs, who slowly relaxed, padding closer to Kaylee, nudging her gently as if reassuring her that they were still there. Ramirez knelt beside her, speaking softly. "You did everything right, Kaylee. You stayed calm, you signaled, and you trusted the right people and the right dogs. You saved yourself." Kaylee hugged the rabbit to her chest, then looked up at Titan and the other dogs. A tentative, small smile broke across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Even as the officers led the man away, handcuffed and defeated, Ramirez could still feel the echo of the canyon, frozen moments of terror, courage, instinct, and connection. The little girl had survived, yes, but she had done more than survive. She had orchestrated her own rescue in a way most adults never could. And as the sirens approached, painting red and blue across the canyon walls, Ramirez glanced at the K9s. 14 dogs, 14 sets of eyes, 14 hearts that had responded to the subtle signal of a frightened child. They had seen what no human had noticed, and they had acted. Kaylee, still clinging to her rabbit, whispered again, "I just wanted someone to notice me." Ramirez's voice softened. "Someone did, and they didn't just notice, they saved you." Titan nudged her hand again, a gentle, grounding reminder that instinct, courage, and connection had won the day. And in the twilight desert, amidst the rising sirens and the quiet panting of heroes with fur and teeth, Kaylee finally allowed herself to smile. For now she was safe. But the memory of that day, the fear, the adrenaline, the coded hand signals, the growls of protective dogs, would stay with her forever. Because even in a world full of danger, she had found a way to speak without words, and 14 dogs had heard everyone. The flashing lights of police vehicles painted the desert canyon in an otherworldly glow. Red, blue, and white streaked across the jagged rocks, bouncing off sand and stone, mingling with the last vestiges of twilight. Kaylee clutched her rabbit tightly as Officer Ramirez guided her down the shallow slope toward the waiting ambulance. Each step made her knees wobble, not from exhaustion alone, but from the lingering adrenaline that refused to fade. The other officers had secured the canyon. The man, Uncle Rick, as he had claimed, was handcuffed and seated against a patrol SUV, muttering incoherently. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his clothes torn, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. He was alive but broken. Kaylee looked up at Ramirez, her voice small and quivering. Are they really going to take him away?" Ramirez crouched, meeting her gaze, careful to speak slowly. "Yes, Kaylee, he can't hurt you anymore. The police will make sure of that." The ambulance crew approached, kneeling beside her. They checked her for injuries, scratches, bruises, minor abrasions, but nothing life-threatening. Her hoodie sleeve hid the deep purple marks on her wrists, evidence of the grip that had terrorized her. One EMT gently lifted her arm, eyes widening as he saw the fingerprints. "Looks like he held on pretty tight," he said quietly. Kaylee's small hand shot to her wrist instinctively, hugging the bruise. Ramirez stood beside her, glancing at the cluster of officers and K-9 handlers. 14 dogs, exhausted, panting, tongues lolling, paws covered in sand and blood from minor cuts, stood in a tight formation. Titan, chest rising and falling rapidly, pressed his nose against Kaylee's knee, as if reassuring her that nothing had been lost. "You did really well," Ramirez said softly. "All of you did." He gestured to the dogs. "They saved you just like they were trained to, but more importantly, they noticed something no human did. You gave them the signal and they understood." Kaylee's voice was barely above a whisper. I wanted someone to notice me." Titan nudged her again, careful, gentle, protective. It was a subtle reminder she had been noticed. She had been saved. Ramirez's chest tightened. So much depended on small, fragile things: the tilt of a hand, the look in a child's eyes, the instinct of an animal trained to respond. It was almost impossible to process. Behind them, officers were processing the man. Evidence bags were being filled. Photos of the bruise were taken. Witness statements recorded. Every minor detail, the fallen rabbit, the scattered sand, the marks on the canyon wall where he had stumbled, was catalogued for the investigation. But amidst all the paperwork and procedure, Ramirez focused on Kaylee. She had survived the unthinkable, and yet she was small, still only 7, still just a child who wanted to be safe. "Would you like me to walk you to your mom?" he asked gently. Kaylee's lips trembled. "Yes." As they moved toward the waiting ambulance, Kaylee glanced over her shoulder. The canyon loomed behind her, shadows stretching deep into the desert floor. It was quiet now, too quiet. Even the dogs were lowering their heads, muscles relaxing after the intense exertion. But in that quiet, there was an echo, a memory of the chaos that had almost consumed her. She thought of the knife, the panic, the terrifying closeness of danger. She thought of the bruises that burned when she moved her arms. She thought of her tiny, coded hand signal, the one she had practiced months ago in secret, and how it had changed everything. Her lips curved into the faintest, tentative smile. She had survived. She had made a difference, and she had been seen when no one else had noticed. The ambulance doors closed gently behind her as EMTs prepared her for transport. Ramirez watched, the fatting sunset painting gold across his face, thinking about the coordination, the instinct, and the courage that had saved a little girl that evening. Meanwhile, the man sat in the patrol vehicle, muttering and trembling, eyes darting nervously at the dogs. Officers whispered among themselves. "He didn't expect 14 dogs to react like that," one said. "He didn't even notice her hand movement, and that's what saved her life." Kaylee's mother arrived shortly after, pulled from the chaos by a uniformed officer. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming, enveloping her daughter in arms that shook with relief and horror. Kaylee buried her face in her mother's shoulder, clutching her rabbit, sobbing quietly. "I'm okay, Mom," Kaylee whispered between tears. "I'm really okay." Her mother's hands shook as she stroked Kaylee's hair. "Oh, baby, I was so scared." Ramirez stayed back, watching the reunion. His mind replayed every detail of the canyon chase: the knife, the panic, the subtle hand signal, the dogs. He realized how fragile life could be, how easily chaos could overwhelm ordinary people. But he also saw the extraordinary courage in a small, terrified girl who had survived because she trusted her instincts, and because 14 dogs had understood her unspoken plea. As the crowd of onlookers began to disperse, officers gathered their reports, walked their dogs, and cleaned up the canyon area. The man was placed under formal arrest, his fate now in the hands of the judicial system. Kaylee's mother squeezed her tightly. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one is going to hurt you ever again." Kaylee nodded, looking down at her rabbit. "The dogs, they saved me," she said softly, a mix of awe and disbelief in her voice. "They knew." Ramirez smiled faintly. "Yes, Kaylee, they knew. You gave them the signal and they understood. You did everything right." The desert stretched out around them, quiet now, save for the distant hum of patrol vehicles and the soft panting of the exhausted K-9s. The canyon walls, once alive with terror and panic, now seemed almost serene in the fading light. But the memory of the day, the adrenaline, the fear, the courage, would stay with everyone involved forever. For Kaylee, the trauma had been real and the danger immediate. But the bravery she had shown, the life-saving signal she had executed perfectly, and the instinct of 14 dogs had proven that even in the darkest moments, courage and connection could prevail. And as the last of the emergency vehicles departed, leaving only the desert wind to ripple the sand, Ramirez watched Kaylee disappear into her mother's arms. He knew that the events of this day, terrifying, chaotic, and miraculous, would not fade easily. For some, the story would be about the man, the kidnapping, and the weapons. But for Ramirez, for the K-9 handlers, and for Kaylee herself, it was always going to be about the subtle courage of a child, the unspoken communication that saved a life, and the extraordinary instincts of the animals who noticed what no human eyes had caught. And somewhere deep in the canyon, Titan and the other dogs rested, tongues lolling, ears twitching at every small sound, silent heroes in a world that often forgot how much animals could understand, and how much a single child's courage could inspire. Even in the calm aftermath, a shadow of what could have happened lingered, a reminder that danger could strike anywhere, and that the smallest voice, the tiniest gesture, could make the difference between life and death. Kaylee looked up at Titan one last time before climbing into her mother's car, hugging her rabbit tightly. She whispered, "Thank you," a simple phrase carrying all the awe, fear, and relief of the day. Titan barked softly, a gentle acknowledgement. The canyon, now quiet, held its secrets, the story of survival etched into sand, stone, and memory. But Ramirez knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a lesson about vigilance, about courage, about listening to signals that others might miss, and about a 7-year-old girl who had survived the impossible. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, every chair filled, every eye fixed on the small figure at the center of the drama. Kaylee sat quietly in her mother's lap, clutching her rabbit like a talisman, eyes wide but alert. Her small hand occasionally brushed against the fabric of her mother's sleeve, fingers curling instinctively around the comforting material. The man, the one who had terrorized her just days before, sat across the room, handcuffed, pale, and trembling. His eyes darted nervously at every officer in the room, at every K-9 handler seated in the front row, and finally at Kaylee herself. He had thought control was his to wield, that fear could bind and silence, but it had all unraveled. The judge entered, gavel striking. Silence fell. The room seemed to shrink, compressing every heartbeat into a single pulse. Cameras from local news networks lined the back wall, capturing the tension, the drama, the fragility of a 7-year-old's courage on display for an entire city. Ramirez and Titan took their place at the side of the courtroom, the German shepherd sitting obediently, eyes focused, ears flicking at every sound. The other K-9s were represented by their handlers, quietly waiting, alert even in the sterile, echoing room. The prosecutor began, recounting the events at the rest stop. Every detail mattered. The initial encounter, the bruises, the threats, the knife, the canyon, and most importantly, the tiny, nearly invisible signal Kaylee had given and the 14 dogs who had noticed. The courtroom hung on every word, each pause heavy with tension. Witnesses, bystanders, officers, EMTs, testified with precision, recounting the terror and the sequence of events with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Then came Kaylee. She didn't speak at first. She simply held her rabbit, her tiny hand raised almost imperceptibly, the same hand signal she had used at the rest stop. The judge, leaning forward, noticed the gesture, his eyes widening. The audience murmured quietly, sensing the gravity of her silent communication. Ramirez approached her gently, crouching to her level. "Kaylee," he whispered, "you don't have to speak, just be honest." Her voice was small, trembling, but steady. I signaled the dogs," she said. "I didn't know anyone would see. I wanted them to help me." The room held its breath, a silence so complete it felt tangible. The judge's expression softened slightly, the weight of her courage settling over him. "You were brave," he said, "more brave than most adults would ever be." The prosecution displayed the photos, the bruised wrists, the fallen rabbit, the footprints in the sand, the canyon trail. Each image told the story with stark clarity, a visual narrative of terror, instinct, and survival. The defense attempted to shift blame, painting the man as desperate, unstable, misunderstood. But every time they tried, Kaylee's testimony, the officer's recollections, and the undeniable coordination of the K-9s cut through the argument like sunlight-piercing fog. "Your Honor," Ramirez said finally, voice steady, "this wasn't just a case of kidnapping. This was a demonstration of instinct, courage, and communication under extreme stress. 14 trained dogs recognized her signal. They understood what no human initially did. That child's presence of mind saved her life." Kaylee looked at Titan, whose head tilted slightly in acknowledgement. The German Shepherd had been her silent partner, her protector, her witness. She reached out a tiny hand, brushing the fur of his muzzle. Titan pressed gently against her fingers, careful not to intimidate, just steady and reassuring. The room felt heavy with quiet respect. No one argued. No one moved. Everyone understood that what had happened was extraordinary. The judge's gavel struck again. "The evidence is clear," he said, voice resonating in the chamber. "The defendant endangered a child. He attempted to abduct and harm her. He is hereby remanded into custody pending sentencing. Let justice be done." A collective sigh of relief swept the room. Kaylee's mother gathered her daughter, holding her tightly. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, the emotional release spilling over after days of terror and uncertainty. Ramirez stood, watching the exchange, feeling the gravity of the moment. The little girl had survived. But more than survival, she had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and the ability to communicate a life-saving signal that changed the course of events. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. But Kaylee and her mother moved through the crowd, protected by officers and handlers. Titan walked beside them, proud, alert, still the silent guardian who had seen, understood, and acted. Kaylee whispered to Ramirez, voice small but filled with awe, "Did the dogs really notice me?" Ramirez smiled gently. "They did, Kaylee, every single one. You spoke to them without words and they listened. You saved yourself." The mother hugged her daughter tightly. "You're a hero," she said, voice trembling. "I never want to see you go through anything like that again." Kaylee hugged the rabbit, her small body shaking with relief, fear, and the residual adrenaline of what she had endured. I just wanted someone to notice me," she admitted. And in that moment, Ramirez understood something profound. It wasn't just the dogs who had noticed. Every person in that courtroom, every officer at the canyon, every bystander at the rest stop, they had seen the courage, the intelligence, and the indomitable will of a child who refused to be powerless. Weeks later, the investigation concluded. Media coverage detailed the heroic actions of the K-9 units, and social media buzzed with the story of the little girl who saved herself with a silent hand signal. The man was sentenced to a lengthy term in prison. Officers and K-9 handlers were praised, and Kaylee returned home, her world forever changed. But something lingered in her memory. The canyon, the shadowed ravine, the smell of sand and fear, the feel of Titan's fur against her hand, the knowledge that her tiny, calculated gesture had saved her life. It was a lesson she would carry forever. Even when the world seemed too large, too terrifying, too out of control, a small voice, a subtle signal, and courage could tip the balance. On the front porch of her home, Kaylee held her rabbit, gazing at the horizon. The desert sun was low, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. She felt a strange mix of relief and awe, knowing she had survived something extraordinary. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she carried the silent acknowledgement that 14 dogs had noticed, understood, and acted, because she had dared to speak without words. Ramirez watched from a distance, satisfied but vigilant. He knew the world could be cruel, chaotic, and unpredictable, but he also knew that courage, instinct, and connection, human and animal alike, could overcome the most terrifying odds. Kaylee looked up at him and whispered, just a little shyly, "Will they remember me?" "They already do," Ramirez said, voice soft, carrying pride and respect. "You changed their world and they saved yours." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows of the K-9 units lingered, long and silent. They had seen what mattered. They had understood what most could not. And they had acted. For Kaylee, for Titan, and for the 14 dogs who had noticed what no one else could, the day had ended in safety, courage, and an unspoken bond that would never fade. But the echo of that canyon, the memory of fear, and the brilliance of a child's small, silent signal would remain, a shadowed light that reminded the world. Courage can come in any size, and heroes sometimes speak without words. The world had noticed, and it would never forget.